have the Industrial Revolution. We talk about this in my class, right? This got people off the farms. You guys studied this. It got people congregating. It got people with some free time and some free interests. Later, it got them to reading newspapers about the Princeton score or the Harvard score. And they got interested. What is this game of football, right? We had a change in religious philosophy. It went from mind and soul, a more effeminate kind of view of Jesus, to Jesus the carpenter, more muscular Jesus, where churches encourage people to get out there and get a little physical, okay? Then we had the first football game. Rutgers-Princeton. Anyone know who won the first football game in 1869 versus Rutgers? Does anybody know? Rutgers. To this day, the most significant win that Rutgers has claimed in their past. There they are. Yes, correct. Rutgers won the first football game. They played again about a week later and Princeton won. So that was about their reign. All right. Here is Team 1. Team 1 of Michigan. Looks like they're wearing kind of baseball-ish uniforms. They probably got them from the baseball team. They're wearing caps, not helmets, of course. All right, this is 1879. Look at the football. More circular, right? This is really the first formal football team that organized west of the Allegheny Mountains, outside the Ivy League schools. They wanted to play football. By the way, they envied Harvard, they envied Yale. They wanted to be like that. They knew they needed a football team. So we did, right? And we won our first game against Racine College, a game played in Chicago. Speaking of Chicago, 1890, 1892. They want to create a football team. They want to create a university. J.D. Rockefeller, the oil baron, funds them with all kinds of money, and they say, not only do we want to have an Ivy League school in the Midwest, to do that, we need to have a football team. So they hire this guy, Amos Alonzo Stagg. Who knows that name? Where is his name today? Do you know?
Yeah, he's on the Big Ten Championship trophy.
Alone. His name alone is on the Big Ten Championship trophy. They hired him to create a great football team. Why? To be able to market their school and say, we're on par with these big schools that are out there in the East. Come to Chicago, not only can you have an Ivy League experience, but you can watch us play great football. And they were really good. And they were really good in the beginning. Okay? But then we had a problem. Here's Harper's Weekly, which is kind of the elite, weekly magazine that everyone reads. And a writer goes out and he investigates what's going on in the West, right? Says, no one in the East has a conception of the rottenness of the whole structure of football. Men are bought and sold like cattle to play. Oh, all these people in the East, by the way, it was going on just as much in the East. Those savages out there in the Midwest, right?
Sounds like the SEC.
That's right. So, but we have a problem. Guess what? It was happening, as it turns out. Michigan happens to have, many of you young students who are going there, one of the most elaborate athletic archives in college that you can find at the U of M Bentley Historical Library. And we happen to have an exchange between a guy named Charles Baer, who's effectively like the athletic director or manager or coach, and one of his young players, a guy named Dutch Ferber. Here's how it goes. He says, to send you to college this fall, Dutch, I will secure you a loan from a friend for $400. But there must be absolute secrecy. We take no chance of evidence leaking out. He continues, we must keep our mouths shut. Who said that? Return this letter. It's the last line. It says, return this letter. Why does he want to return?
Because it's evident.
Because he doesn't want me showing you this 125 years later in an auditorium somewhere, okay? His family kept the letter, okay? We have evidence of these deals, these fake loans, and pay it back when you can, and a friend's going to help you, and all this stuff was going on. Okay, we had a problem. So the schools knew there was a problem that is out in the public, and a group called the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives got together and their first goal was to address this problem. Does anyone know the formal name of the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives today?
NCAA.
Close. It's a little closer to home. It's the Big Ten. 1896. They formalize it. Michigan's a founding member. There's 6 other schools. Here's a trick. Can anyone name those 6 other schools? That's tough.
Chicago, Purdue.
Purdue, yep. Yep.
Not State. No.
Got it.
Chicago. Oh, Northwestern.
Michigan, Northwestern. I think you're missing 2 more. No, and definitely not
Definitely
Michigan
not
State.
Michigan State.
Illinois and Wisconsin. Very good. Indiana and Iowa joined shortly after that. Ohio State soon after that. Chicago dropped out later than that. Michigan State was the next. Not until almost 1950. Okay. All right. Who's this guy?
Ooh.
Anyone know who this is? Ooh. I showed this to the football team. They all know who this is. That's interesting. Anyone know who this is?
It's Chrysler.
No. Really?
Jack Harbaugh.
Yeah, that's Fielding H. Yost. Does he look confident?
Yeah.
Does he look maybe a little bit arrogant?
Yeah.
Well, he should be. All right. He coached across the country, winning championships year after year after year on a 4 to 5 year span across the country. Along the way, he made a bunch of relationships with other players. So what did he do? So Michigan hired him in 1901 to be our new football coach. He brought 3 of the best players that he saw from around the country and said, come to Michigan, you can play right away, transfer to us. Dan McGugan later became his brother-in-law, fantastic player from Drake that he met when he was coaching at Nebraska. Guy they called Dad Gregory, a giant lineman, probably bigger than I am, okay? Met at Stanford. The great Willie Heston, arguably the greatest running back since Blake Corum. Apologies to your young man. All right. Came here, by the way, scored 71 touchdowns in 4 years, never lost a game in Michigan. Okay. Brought him from San Jose State.
Wow.
All right. So he did that all legal at the time, brought him to Michigan. What did he do? 1901. Not only did they win every single game, the opponents did not score a single point against Michigan in 1901. 550 points to 0. Touchdowns were worth 5 points. Yes, he beat Buffalo 128 to nothing. A friend from where he coached the year before in Stanford wrote him and said, Fielding, excuse me, my newspaper arrived the other day and it said you defeated Buffalo 128 to nothing. This cannot be, can it? It was true. He beat everyone. Now the rules were a little different. You couldn't throw the ball. The kickoffs were a little different. Just know he absolutely blew everyone's doors off. And he did it basically for the next 5 years at Michigan. Our first 4 national championships came out of this. The last game was against Stanford on January 1st, 1902. And it happened to be at the Rose Bowl. And this is the reason. Here's the Rose Parade from that game. Also a photo from the Bentley Historical Library. This was by the Tournament of Roses Committee in Pasadena, California, on January 1st, 1902. This is why we call the Rose Bowl the granddaddy of them all. This was the first football game they proposed to have for this event. Why did they want an event? Has anyone been to Pasadena in January? It's pretty nice. It's beautiful. Lots of flowers. Climate's nice. If you've been to a Rose Bowl game, it was probably a pretty nice day. They wanted to bring people from this part of the country to come see their town. This was their promotion. Okay, they brought Michigan. Naturally, Michigan destroyed, and Yost destroyed their opponent. There's a guy on this float. His name is Neil Snow. There he is. He scored 5 touchdowns in that first Rose Bowl. All right? He was the big man on campus. He got anywhere between 9 and 11 letters. They're not sure. He's track and field. He played tennis. He was a baseball star. There's his photo. All right, so he's back home. He's kind of like Blake Corum right now. where they won this Rose Bowl, they beat everybody. He's kind of the guy, but he also plays baseball. And baseball, like Michigan baseball right now, is still finishing up. All right, there's a game in June. This is the last varsity event in Ann Arbor. This ad shows up. In the game program. The game program for the baseball game against Cornell. Who? Snow, of course. When? Since childhood. Where? Any place it's sold. Why? To make me strong. What? Pale Select. Manufactured by Coppets Melcher Brewing Company. It's a beer. It's a beer ad featuring our man Neil Snow. His name, his image, his likeness, all in there. Now, we have a problem. Here's the beer. How are we going to settle this problem? Here's the biggest problem. He didn't know the ad was going to appear. He was told at the game, hey, did you know your picture was here for a beer company? By the way, he's still a college student. And by the way, people had different opinions about people drinking beer on campus back then than maybe they do today. He had a problem. He wrote the brewery. He said, hey, I love your beer. This is true. He said, I love your beer, but I didn't want everybody knowing about it. How can we settle this matter? They wrote him back and said, how about we send you a case of beer? And he said, fine. And they sent him a case of beer to his place on State Street. It was settled. Your first instance that I'm aware of at any college of a deal for his name, image, and likeness settled with a case of beer. That's Neil Snow. All right. You may have seen this picture behind you before. You've heard of gridiron in referred to football. This is why they talk about football as a gridiron. They used to actually paint the field like a grid, about 5-yard grid, like this. This is actually Ferry Field at Michigan. It's not where the current track is at Michigan today. Okay, this is actually where Chemefer Hall is today, if you are, you care about this. This is where Michigan played some of its early games, but something else went on there. The game's popularity is getting wild. You might notice that people are climbing trees to try to get a view of what's going on. Popularity is getting wild. Frenzy on campus. As students arrive on campus, they want to know about the football team, okay? Thomas Edison, his company, has a film crew at the game to try to capture a full football game for the first time. Why? Not to show it on TV, not to stream it, but to show it to the masses in a movie theater. So they actually capture the game. Here's some clips of it. Here's the opening kickoff. It's basically a scrum. Actually, for the first football game ever, filmed, it's not bad, right? You can kind of make out what's going on. All right, this poor guy's getting dragged up. Yeah. Well, it's funny. There was offsides on the original kickoff. In the original film, they actually kick off twice. It's kind of like a replay.
Ooh, tush push.
All right. Yeah. So there's a tush push. The players actually had little hooks on their pants so you could grab them and try to pull them forward. And then, it's just an absolute scrum. And that's Willie Heston scoring. There's more. It's a little gruesome. Like, here we go. A player goes down, and people don't seem too concerned about him. They're pulling people off. Now they're concerned. Now we have a problem.
He's
unconscious. His head, they're rub it, give him some smelling salts. Maybe we'll be all right. The game was brutal. There you go. He's checking his head, a brutal collision. And so, so that was the game. So meanwhile, you have more allegations of teams in the Midwest and elsewhere buying football games by paying players. Collier's, another fancy, elite newspaper gets out there. Finally, the president, the guy who, Angel Hall, who I mentioned earlier, James Burl Angel was later named after, right? He's concerned. The public had come to consider the first 12 weeks of football, of college were just for football, right? Students were becoming infected with the wrong idea of what college life stood for. This is our president. This is like President no. Like he's basically sick of this, okay? So what did this lead to? This led to basically a revolt of the regents at the time and the athletic department going, all right, Angel, we got you, but we're not conforming with this. They tried to propose some rules to control football, to limit the games, to limit the money, to limit all the exposure. And our own athletic department got with the regents and said, forget it. We're going alone. And they went off as an independent for 10 years. By the way, when we were gone, this is when Ohio State joined the conference. Okay, when we were gone. All right, so we had this bigger problem though. You had scenes like this. You had scenes like the video I showed you, the film I showed you. That guys will leave the games very damaged. This led to the President of the United States getting involved. This is Teddy Roosevelt. Big football fan, big outdoorsman, right, Teddy, big hunter, right, national parks, yeah, all that stuff. People are dying playing football. People are dying. People are dying in high school, literally dying on the football field, dying days later, being maimed. Has to do something about it. He goes, okay. He gets the Ivy League schools together and says, look, we gotta do something. And someone goes, hey, I have an idea. Listen, we got this field, right? Let's widen it. We're gonna make it wide. So it's, it's sideline to sideline like it is today. We'll make it super wide this way and super wide that way so you can kind of run and there won't be like these violent collisions. And everyone kind of goes, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Someone in the back of the room goes, wait, excuse me. Hi, we're from Harvard. We built our stadium a few years ago, remember? And it goes right up to the sidelines, okay? So your big plan to like safen the game by widening the field, that's not gonna work for us. And remember, we're Harvard, okay? Okay, that's not gonna work in our beautiful new stadium we built. And they go, oh, sorry, Harvard. And someone goes, well, how about we have the forward pass then? That'll make it safer, it'll open up the defense. Yeah, forward pass then. Harvard goes, yeah, forward pass, not wreck our new stadium. So those two factors, the safety and the fact that Harvard had already built a cement stadium that could not be moved, are two big reasons why today we have the forward pass. And out of these discussions came the organization as the NCAA, okay? And that created what is now effectively the NCAA, out of safety and out of a desire to open up the field. World War I passes, the Roaring 20s, we go into a boom. A few things happen. We started this notion of having superstars. Red Grange, the galloping ghost from Illinois, right? Writers write about him. He's probably, arguably the best college football player in history. Bronco Nagurski from Minnesota. The Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. Probably heard of these names. Here's one you probably heard of. Some of you in this area, Benny Oosterbaan. Where's Benny Oosterbaan from? Anybody? Muskegon, Michigan, right up here. Okay. The greatest athlete that Michigan has ever had. He was All-American and captain, two-time All-American, by the way, captain in football. Led the Big Ten in scoring in basketball. Led the Big Ten in hitting in baseball. Would have qualified for the 1928 Olympics in discus, in track, not mentioned here. That's this kind of guy. Had multiple pro contracts in football and baseball. He turned down, partly due to religious reasons, partly because he wanted to dedicate his life to the University of Michigan, and he did. Okay, from Muskegon. All right, so how are we gonna watch these people play? Ohio built a stadium in 1922 because they want to watch these superstars. Illinois in 1923. Yost is now the athletic director. All right, he's getting hundreds, thousands requests for tickets in our stadium that basically holds 40,000 people, right? He says everyone would like a 50-yard line seat. Some people are even asking for a 55-yard seat, which used to be the middle of the field back in the day. He persuades everyone we need to build a stadium. He has a clever idea of how to finance it with bonds, state-issued bonds. They earn 3% interest. Not bad at the time. but they come with preferred seating privileges. They sit, you buy a bond, you get rights between the 30s for 20 years to buy tickets. This is a brand new idea. He came up with it to fund the stadium itself. It cost around $1 million back in the day, if you want to know. Michigan Stadium is built successfully and funded. All the bonds paid off, by the way, but opened in 1927. October 1929, a huge report comes out on the entire Big Ten saying, listen, there's a 3-year pro, everyone's cheating. October 29. Does anyone know what else happened in October 29?
Stock market crash.
Literally, like 4 days later, the stock market crashes, the world enters the Great Depression, and everyone suddenly forgets about the scandalous report. Okay, all right, Michigan hires this guy, as we get out of this, hired Harry Kipke. He's a Lansing native, Michigan State College. Who's number 48? Gerald Ford. 1930s, wins 2 national championships. One of his players is our future president, Gerald Ford from Grand Rapids. His roommate on the road is a guy named Willis Ford, black player. First black player at Michigan since the early 1890s. Guy named George Jewett. Michigan and Northwestern now play for the George Jewett Trophy. Good friends. Kipke wanted a black player on his team. Yost had problems. He's a Confederate, grew up in West Virginia. His father was a Confederate soldier. They allowed Willis on the team. Georgia Tech comes to town in 1934. Georgia Tech's Southern School, Jim Crow laws are in place. They do not want to play against a black player. The campus erupts. Faculty, students, most of them basically saying, we got Georgia Tech coming to town. They don't want to play the game against our player. It's our students, our teammate. We should either not play the game or cancel the game or allow Ward to play. Ward is benched for the game. It's a dark moment in Michigan history. It's a bright moment in Michigan student, faculty, and other history. They spoke up. They tried to do something to change this. The athletic department said no. I'm not pointing fingers, and I'm not going to put. We're not doing these trials. This was how life was. If you ask people my age back then, they would have said, "These are our guests. You should bench the black player. They don't want to play against the black." That's how people thought. Okay, it was a difficult time. But what I like about this is, first of all, this is a West Michigan guy. This friendship endured all the way to the White House. Here's Ward years later in the Oval Office, by the way. Yeah, cheers. He's smoking a cigar in the Oval Office. He has 2 more ready to go, which I appreciate very much. But to me, we got to learn from these moments. We talk about these tough times, these tough issues. It's not all championships. There are dark times. These are things we talk about, we wrestle with in my class. Okay, so here's another thing people don't talk about. Kipke was fired. People don't talk about that. We don't like to talk about when our coaches are fired. 1, a payment scheme was exposed. The Chicago Alumni Club had a scheme to lure recruits and pay players. Hello. They might have called it a collective back then, but they didn't have that. Okay, they said, hey, guy from Holland, Michigan who's really good at football, we're the big Holland Alumni Club. Come to Michigan, we got a job for you. Hey, Ann Arbor business, here's some money at the lumber yard in Ann Arbor. Hey, this kid might be coming to come by for a job. Hey, go for the job. Hey, pay the kid whether they come or not. Okay? Fake jobs, it was all exposed. And this is all a big reason why Harry Kipke was fired. Here's another reason. The board didn't like his friends. What are we talking about? A coach got fired because we didn't like his friends? That's weird. This is strange. Well, he was friends with this guy, a guy named Harry Bennett. He happened to be Henry Ford's right-hand man, okay? But he was bad. He wasn't all bad. This is a quote. Harry wasn't all bad, he was just 85% bad. This was a bad dude. Henry Ford had problems, the factory. He sent him to Harry Bennett, and he fixed him. Okay, you dig? Like, union problems? I'll get Harry on that. Okay? There's a reason he looks like the big gangsters that we see in films today. Okay? I think he inspired some of these figures. You might have heard of the Battle of the Overpass, famous battle between the Union and the Ford Brass that happened. He instigated the whole thing. At one point, he had thousands of people working for him at his hand to enforce Ford's rules, problems, and all that. He was buddies with Harry Kipke. This house still exists on Gettys Road, not far from Radford Farms. Okay, it's called Bennett's Castle. Wow. It's made of concrete. I kid you not, it had a V8 engine that was basically like a generator to run the place. It had tunnels, it had a lookout. He had lions and tigers on prem in secret tunnels, and people were told they went there, and some people never came out. Okay, this was a bad dude. So, of course, the fancy people at Michigan did not like the fact that our football coach was associating with this man. Okay, enter Fritz Chrysler. There's Fritz. Okay, clean as a whistle, Fritz Chrysler. Michigan beats Chicago 85-0. Shortly after, our friends from Chicago quit football after this game. Enough. They chose the academic path. They chose not to get in an arms race. They did not allow Stagg, by the way, to have a stadium. They said it's enough is enough. Okay, and we're moving on. And they absolutely beat them. All right, our friends at the NCAA, by the way, all this time have been very quiet. Suddenly, though, there's money involved. We have the onset of the NCAA basketball tournament in the late 1940s. Football's starting to make money. People are starting to be interested. Oh, by the way, in the 1950s, we go from almost no one owning a TV to everyone owning a TV. They start to go, oh, there's money in this. So they lawyer up. They create a term. You probably have used it. It's called student athlete. They came up with that term. They came up with that term to defend themselves. It's not an employee. They're not actually being a student. They're a volunteer athlete as while they're a student. They're kind of a substance in between. So if something bad happens to them, we're not to blame. We're not to blame. The school's not to blame. The NCAA is not to blame. And they actually used this early in the 50s in a lawsuit that set precedent where this poor guy, Ray Dennison, died in a game. He came back from serving in World War II, as many people did, played football, died in the field. And his widow, with these kids, tried to sue. She got a rock with a plaque on it. She didn't get anything else because the court kind of bought the student athlete thing. It's a volunteer, amateur, while they're a student. So that's where that comes from, okay, that term. This gets popular. Everything changed as far as access. You guys have met, many of you met Carol Hutchins. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 changed a ton. Before 1964, basically zero black athletes in the SEC. It wasn't until the early 70s that the first, finally, each team was integrated. Title IX, probably the biggest change for inclusion that we've had in our lives. You guys met Carol Hutchins. You probably know she was a softball and basketball standout at Michigan State, grew up in Lansing, was classmates with a very famous guy named Irvin Johnson, Magic Johnson. She's in their Hall of Fame, right? Did she tell you that she is on the name of a lawsuit against Michigan State University on equal rights of pay for her team? They didn't have the same benefits, not even close, as the basketball team. They all packed in the van and drove to the teams, okay? They sued, they won, but Hutchins versus the Board of Trustees at Michigan State University was one of the pioneer cases. She might have mentioned that, I'll mention it here, and I'll mention something else. She came to Michigan. She wanted to be a softball coach. She had a brief stint in Indiana for an iconic coach. She came here. Does anyone know the first question she was asked in her interview? She mentioned this. Anyone want to know why that was the first question she was asked? It's because she wasn't hired as a full-time coach. She was a secretary for half the time. She was a 50% coach. Count on your time to coach. The rest of the time, you're the secretary here in the athletic department. Take it tight. She said yes. She lied. Okay. She actually couldn't type very well. It's hot. Check me better. Okay. By the way, the all-time winningest softball coach in history years later, after she got respect, the resources. You probably know that the freaking stadium's now named after her. One of the most popular sports in Michigan, Carroll Hutchins Stadium, is where the softball team played, who, by the way, just won the Big Ten championship tournament. Yeah. So I love it. So one more little anecdote, and then I have a quick closer. So one of her high school at Lansing Everett was Magic Johnson. You guys know Magic. You guys remember this game. Did anyone watch this game? I wasn't allowed to. You watched this game. I had to go to bed early. I was 8. Obviously iconic. You probably know that this game is credited with really sending college basketball, many would argue the NBA later, into outer space as far as ratings, attention, money, whatever you want to say. Okay. Well, the first NCAA tournament was held in 1938. That launch point was 1979, right? That was 41 years between the start of that and early time. So I take you real quick to this. The first NCAA women's tournament was 1982. All right, the launch point, I don't think anyone would argue, was last year. It just doubled this year. It's exactly 41 years. Time, exposure, these issues matter, okay? I went to more, I'm at time?
No, it's starting right now.
Yeah.
First game.
Oh, right on, okay. All right.
Would you rather what?
No, it's fantastic. So Caitlin's about to start her first game, which no one would be even thinking of even 3 years ago. Like what? WNBA where?
It's probably on
Absolutely.
It's probably on Peacock.
Yeah, probably a Peacock. All right, so one final thing. So this is how I led each of my classes. I know I'm very fortunate to having been taught, by the way, about 30% of my students are athletes and many of them are football players. I happen to have had a media credential for the football team for the last 15 years. It gives me field access and things like this. I happen to see some of my students after some of these games on the field. It was a nice experience. I led each of my classes, each of these 3 classes, with the question, is this the greatest, football team, Michigan football team of all time? And I'll share with you what I shared with them. Here are our 12 national championships. 11 of these on the banner over there. 2023 needs to be added to it. And I think you start there. And of course, many of you guys are probably Bo Schembechler fans, so none of Bo's teams are directly on this list. And you could probably argue, yeah, this Bo team or that Bo team, maybe they're the best. But I started with the national championship teams, okay? And what I teach my students is I put Michigan football into these 5 eras, what I call the club era, when those letters and loans are being written and all that, the Fielding H. Yost era, the Chrysler era, the Schembechler era, that yes, went right up to what I consider the Harbaugh era, which is continuing now. People criticize me, by the way, for extending out the Schembechler era. I'll tell you this, that each era ended in this era ended with those Kipke scandals. Okay, this era ended with Bump Elliott, less than a 500 record in the Big Ten. Okay, over his time period. Bob Elliott did great things here. Each era was preceded by really, really tough times, and it took someone to change it. So I look at it this way. So the way I look at, is this the greatest, is to overlay what was the greatest team in each of those eras, okay? We start with 1901. You guys remember this guy. You know what he did on the field. It's tough to argue. No one scored a point. We dominated everyone. So what are we supposed to do with this? He left a legacy. His nickname, Hurry Up Yost, came out of that. The hurry up offense that you hear about in the NFL came from this guy, this season, this era. The Michigan Daily gave him the nickname Hurry Up in this season. Okay, it's why we do these things. He has the point a minute era. They scored almost exactly a point a minute for every minute they played. Touchdowns were only worth 5 points. They couldn't pass the ball. You knew what was coming. They couldn't do anything about it. And they completed the season in the Rose Bowl, right? It was dominated. Why might that not be the best? Well, the team they beat in the Rose Bowl wasn't actually the West Coast champion. I can get into that some other time. They never played what people would consider to be the best, though, which was still the East. They never played Harvard or Yale, okay, or Princeton, or Columbia, or Penn. They didn't play those teams. So they might be the greatest team ever, but we don't know. Because they really never got the shot. 1947. Fritz Kreisler. Here's a little clip of the Mad Magicians. His team, this is from the Rose Bowl in 1947. They have a dazzling display of ball fakes, spinning. You had to be physically fit enough to spin around enough to fool the defense as you went along. Plays from this team have been used by the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Okay, they've looked at some of the innovations they've done, and they're used today. But Bob Chappius, lots of great players. But they actually changed at the end of the season. The AP, the Associated Press, only voted until the end of the regular season. They made the AP change their policy to do a new vote where they voted at the end after the Rose Bowl and they picked Michigan. Okay, so they made history for all those elements. They were perfect. Their legacy on NFL teams and beyond, they have a great nickname. They forced a change in how even we think about determining champions. The problem, okay, they had a couple tight wins. They beat only 2 ranked teams, and the other team that won that regular season national title was Notre Dame. Notre Dame still claims the 1947 national championship. So we share the 1947. We never played them. Someone proposed, by the way, like $1 million game of Michigan Notre Dame. Never happened. 1997, of course. Okay, you guys know the story. I saw Lloyd Carr, by the way, on Saturday. He's doing pretty good. He's moving on. I saw him at the end of the Chad Tuff Gala, which is for his grandson who passed away. Great guy. Wonderful guy. Historian, by the way, eats this stuff up that you guys are listening to. You guys know the story with this team.
I think certainly you deserve the opportunity, Lloyd, to express what this victory means to you.
Well, then, 50 years ago, the University of Michigan won the national championship in this stadium, and this is a dream. It's been a wonderful season. I want to thank our players, our coaches, the great Michigan fans. We're just happy that being a great Washington State team, it went right down to the wire just like we thought it would. But
So there's Lloyd. Perfect season, #1 in the AP. We had the iconic player, the Heisman Trophy, finished in the Rose Bowl, but we split it with Nebraska, as you guys, I'm sure, all know, right? Because the coaches vote, and I put an asterisk there because it's fun. That wasn't a great team. Okay, 2023. So, some of you are going to be a little jealous right now. This is my video from the end of the Rose Bowl. That's where I was standing.
Oh, too bad.
I'll go with it.
Here's my favorite.
Yeah.
Watch this guy.
That's a great block.
Oh, yeah.
This is where we all went to listen.
I think I would have hoped.
And then I stopped it and went like this. All right.
You're running down.
That's right. And there's Herb Street's dog with his press credential, by the way. Kirk Herb. That's me. And there they are. You guys know how it ended. 15-0. 5 ranked teams in the last 6 games. A Big Ten championship, which the other teams didn't have to go through. The Rose Bowl. The playoff championship. With the last, I guess, legitimate undefeated team. I have no reason why. I can't sit here and argue why. There's really no reason to say these guys aren't the best. I don't know how they would have done in 1997. You guys have been awesome. I'm Professor Greg Dooley. Thank you very, very much.